and to culture wars. Yeah, I used to read my children so much Dr Seuss, and they loved it, particularly my daughter, you know, especially Green Eggs and Ham. I will not eat it in a boat. I will not eat it with a goat. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them, Sam I am. I'm not alone. These books still sell in more than 100 countries. They're still hugely popular. But shock. Who knew that Dr Seuss and his books are now racist? Now, until a few years ago, not even Michelle Obama, wife of US President Obama, not even she suspected this, and she is a real race warrior. She was back then happy to promote Dr Seuss and his books.
Oh, and it's the Cat in the Hat. Wow. And we've got Genevieve who's going to turn the pages on the big book.
But then Melania Trump, wife of that supposedly racist President Trump, she promoted Dr Seuss books too, and suddenly, oh well, when she started giving them to schools, the media got excited because one library started to return them, told off Melania, saying the books were racist. And two academics with time on their hands, obviously, wrote a paper with the ominous title, "The Cat is Out of the Bag, Orientalism, Anti-Blackness and White Supremacy" in Dr Seuss's children's books. What a title. And it claimed that more than 40 of these books were racist. Even the Cat in the Hat himself was racist for apparently dressing up in a costume inspired by racist black and white minstrel shows. And now the publishers are so spooked by all this that they've taken 6 Dr Seuss books off the menu, no longer publishing them, including And to Think That I Saw It in Mulberry Street and If I Ran the Zoo. They're claiming they can't publish these books because they portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong. Now, to go through the shocking racism, and if you've got sensitive souls in the room, I suggest you stick them behind the pot plant or behind the door, because the racism we're going to uncover. I'm joined by Rowan Dean, editor of Spectator Australia, a novelist himself, not yet banned, I wonder why, and host of Outsiders on Sky News on Sundays at 9 a.m. Rowan, the still unbanned Rowan, did you ever suspect, and your antenna are so finely tuned, did you ever suspect that Dr Seuss was a racist and so was his cat?
Well, I didn't, Andrew, for the very good reason that he wasn't. I grew up, like you, my favourite cartoons were Tintin, the great Belgian character, who has also, over time, been accused of racial stereotypes and so on. But I also used to read the Cat in the Hat books and used to enjoy them as a kid. The really insidious thing here, Andrew, is that this is the real moment we've stepped through that Orwellian black mirror into a clear sign now that the agenda here is not anti-racism. The agenda here is racism, as you've often said. Because one of the, if you look at there are 6 books that have been banned by Seuss. He wrote many, many different books, and some have become famous in movies. The Grinch That Stole Christmas, this sort of thing. Cat in the Hat's the obvious one, but there were many others. And one of them, in particular, The Sneetches, was actually a kid's story fighting racism. It was written in the 60s. It was written at the time of the civil rights movement. In today's terms, I would be one of those accusing Dr Seuss of being a lefty, a lovey, a liberal. But he was actually of the left in those days, and being of the left, one of the key fights that he fought was against racism. And what he did in The Sneetches, which is a story, it's an allegory, if you like, an analogy of these weird characters. All his characters were kind of, you know, odd, caricatures and strange creatures. But this was two creatures that looked identical on some mythical planet somewhere, and the only thing that separated them apart was a tiny little symbol, which happened to be a star. So I don't know if he got that from sort of the 1930s in Germany.
That,
yeah, exactly.
Yep,
so they had a star on them, but the ones with the stars on them were the goodies, and the ones that didn't have the star, they weren't bad, but they just didn't have what the people with the star had, or the creatures had. And the whole story evolves around who's got the star and who doesn't, and the moral of the story, and they all do everything to try and get the stars, and the moral of the story is it's not about the badge that you wear, it's about who you are as an individual. So this was identity politics being attacked being attacked by this guy very, very deliberately, saying different badges, we're not two tribes, we are all the same under the skin, which was precisely the message that Martin Luther King came out with, that the civil rights movement was about, that Kennedy was about, that the whole 1960s left movement, civil rights movement was about. We're not, doesn't matter what our badge is, doesn't matter what the colour of our skin is, doesn't matter whether we're rich or poor, it matters what we are as an individual. Now, these clowns, well, they're either clowns or it's deliberate, sinister. Imagine cancelling someone
it's rank
who
pulling.
has
pulling.
Well, it's worse than
posture-making.
that. It's saying let's get rid of the message that we are all the same underneath, because the left now are actually sponsoring division and racism. They're sponsoring racism in terms of white privilege, saying, oh, those white people are bad. It's the very story Seuss was telling. They're now banning. I think this is more sinister than just the usual woke craziness. It's really sinister, Andrew.
Well, let's rattle through some of these examples. Now, I don't want to, gloss over things. It is true that Seuss, not his real name, that was his pen name, before he wrote his children's books, did draw what would now clearly be considered racist images by many. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but they were, pretty stereotypical kind of stuff. But let's look at the things that his books actually banned, that made his books banned. First, his first book, the Mulberry Street one, and to think I saw it on Mulberry Street, it used to have this image of, it said, a Chinaman who eats with sticks. And obviously you can see he's got yellow skin, the pigtail of the kind Chinese men had to wear by law until a century ago, narrow eyes, chopsticks and a pointed hat. In fact, like the kind that is still being sold, almost like a fashion accessory today. Rowan, is that actually a racist image that should be banned? Bearing in mind that Seuss actually later removed the pigtail from that image with the new editions and called the man a Chinese man.
Well, it's not a racist image. And I mentioned Hergé and Tintin before, and Hergé had exactly the same problem. He was a cartoonist, and cartoonists who drew caricatures, particularly before you had the era of globalization, when different, people were literally unfamiliar if they were in a different country, particularly on the other side of the world. How they looked, how they dressed, how they spoke, what their food was unfamiliar, because we didn't have jet planes, we didn't travel, we didn't have television, we didn't have the internet. So people would pick up the idea of this is what this person looks like in that country, this is what that person looks like there. And of course there were stereotypes, and of course the pointed hat, of course the pigtail, the chopsticks. These are drawn out of affection. They're not drawn out of attacking or demeaning or belittling. These are drawn out of, wow, isn't this a great character? And a great love of how different people look. And he was actually celebrating.
And at that time too, Rowan,
absolutely.
Let's stress, at that time too, the Chinese people in China would have looked on, en masse, a lot different to today, before they got Western civilization and got a lot richer.
Precisely.
A problem with another of the banned books, The Cat's Quizzer, is this image of a Japanese boy, yellow skin, again the hat, standing on Mount Fuji. How could that be racist and hurtful?
Well, again, it's not, Andrew, and this is the problem. People conflate racial stereotypes with racism. Sure, there are racist racial stereotypes, but there are also non-racist racial stereotypes. We always talk, for instance, about how the Italians are great at opera, or the French make great food, or whatever. These aren't racist racial stereotypes. They're affectionate racial stereotypes. They're stereotypes of envy. They're nothing to do with belittling people. They're recognising the differences in human cultures and celebrating them. And this should be applauded, and denigrating it and finding racism in every single racial stereotype is itself, as I said, deeply sinister.
Yeah, I must, in all, laying it out for people, some pictures do jar. This one is from another of the banned books showing Africans as primitives with top knots and big lips. I can imagine some people might take offence to that, but I'm not quite sure whether banning stuff rather than letting it up to people to decide for themselves is the way to go. Rowan Dean, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew. Good to see you.